Isn't it now the case that it's much easier for one man's home to become another man's castle?
Well, under the Kelo decision, which, as you explained, was interpreting the public use requirement in the Constitution, the majority, and of course, as you mentioned, it was a closely divided case, the majority explained its reasoning by noting the difficulty in drawing the line. Everybody would agree, as you suggest, to build a road or to build a railroad, to situate a military base if that's the only suitable place, that the power of eminent domain is appropriate in those instances. And I think people agree further that when you're talking about a hospital or something like that, that satisfies public use. And I think the reason the court gave, really, in the majority opinion, was that it's kind of hard to draw the line. The dissent, Justice O'Connor's dissent, didn't think it was that hard. She focused on the question of whether it was going to be a use open to the public, as, you know, a road, a hospital, use for the public, like in a military base, or private. And she would have drawn the line there and said even public benefits that derive from different private uses don't justify that aspect of it. There was a caveat in the Kelo majority. They said they were only deciding this in the context of an urban redevelopment plan. They reserved the question if it's just taking one parcel and giving it to somebody else, not part of a broader plan. That question was still open. And as you said, there's been a lot of reaction to it. I understand some states have even legislated restricting their power.
And we are considering it here in the Congress.
And I think that's a very appropriate approach to consider. In other words, the court was not saying you have to have this power, you have to exercise this power. What the court was saying is there is this power, and then it's up to the legislature to determine whether it wants that to be available, whether it wants it to be available in limited circumstances, or whether it wants to go back to an understanding, like as reflected in the dissent, that this is not an appropriate public use. That leaves the ball in the court of the legislature. And I think it's reflective of what is often the case, and people sometimes lose sight of, that this body and legislative bodies in the states are protectors of the people's rights as well. It's not simply a question of legislating to address particular needs, but you obviously have to also be cognizant of the people's rights, and you can protect them in situations where the court has determined, as it did 5-4 in Kelo, that they are not going to draw that line. You still have the authority to draw.
I understand the authority we maintain. What I'm curious about is your view is, does that right exist? I would not think Blackstone would agree that that right exists for the public to take private property for private use.
Well, in you know, the first year in law school, we all read the decision in Calder against Bull, which has this famous statement that the government may not take the property of A and give it to B. And that certainly was quoted in the dissent, in Justice O'Connor's dissent. The Kelo majority, though, said if a legislature wants to exercise that power, basically that the court's not going to second-guess the judgment that this is a public use. And I do think that imposes a heavy responsibility on the legislature to determine what they're doing and whether it is a public use or if it's simply transferring from one private party to the next. But
I take it you're not going to respond whether or not that right exists under the Constitution.
Well, the Kelo decision obviously was just decided last year, and I don't think I should comment whether it was correct or not. It stands as a precedent of the court. It did leave open the question of whether it applied in a situation that was not a broader redevelopment plan, but and if the issue does come back before the court, I need to be able to address it without having previously commented on.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressmen because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!